No, he'll do it. Hi everyone, welcome to the first masterclass live session that we are doing as part of Living My Promise today. I am Abhishek and today I'll be asking Rathish, co-founder and managing partner at Sattva Consulting, a few questions that we have on the topic, hierarchy of impact, 3 key anchors for individual philanthropy. So sit back and enjoy the conversation. And if you think you have questions you want to ask Rathish, just add it into the comment section below and I'll try to bring it up during our conversation with Rathish. In the meanwhile, let me introduce you all to Living My Promise. Inspired by Gates and Warren Buffett's Giving Pledge, Living My Promise is a promise intended for ordinary Indians to donate 50% or more of their wealth to charitable causes. The idea is very simple. Anyone with a net worth of 1 crore or more can sign up and pledge to donate more than 50% of their wealth for philanthropic causes. Which causes, organizations, or activities you support is entirely your choice. The giving can happen either during your lifetime or in the will. So far, 35 Indians took the pledge. Read about why they took it up and more information on LivingMyPromise.org website. So let's get started, Rathish. Here's the first question. Is every philanthropist driven by impact in some way? Is impact so core to giving?
Absolutely. I think the idea that you want to kind of impact somebody's life beyond your own is, I think, a fundamental foundation for giving or philanthropy in any form. I think the nuance there, Abhishek, is really what do we define as impact? Because I think we use that word very broadly. For me, it means something else. For example, at Sattva, we say impact is ending poverty in our lifetime, but the definitions for different people is very, very different. And what we've realized, and in our own experience over the last 10 years at Sattva, and my experience with talking to a wide range of philanthropists and funders, is that understanding and teasing out that nuance of what impact is actually helps, goes a long way in defining a very effective philanthropic strategy.
That's interesting, Rathish. Thanks. For those of you who are listening, feel free to add comments to the section below, and I'll keep an eye on. Next question, Rathish. You wrote about the 3 anchors on relationship with impact. What are these 3 anchors?
Yeah, and thanks for asking. I think it started with this whole definition of what is impact, because what we realized as personally, as I was talking to philanthropists on an everyday basis, is there is an increasing number of people who are now coming into the philanthropic space. They could be CSR donors, they could be foundations, they could be individuals who are high net worth, they could actually be everyday people who want to give to impact. And a lot of them have had a level of success in life, in business, and so on. And it kind of trains you to kind of ask the question saying, what is the problem we are solving? To say, what is the social problem we're solving, and how do we begin from there? But I realized that a more important question to ask actually was, what do you want? As a philanthropist, coming into the space, wanting to impact other people, what is it that the philanthropist actually is looking for? And that's really where this anchor conversation came in, to say, what is your anchor of impact? And in my experience, there are three things that are very, very common. The first anchor is really where you're anchored to yourself. Like, you want to create and feel good about the work that you're doing. You want to get that sense of satisfaction that I'm able to help some people. You look at what matters a lot to you, what means most to you, and start from there to say, can I make any difference? I think that is really one anchor. The second anchor that I've seen is people who are anchored to the poor. They are genuinely moved by the fact that people who are not people they meet on a day-to-day basis, or not on issues that they care about, actually are suffering, and essentially are saying, can I do anything to help these people, in whatever form or manner? And that kind of starts off a conversation to say, what is the problem and how can I solve it? The third set of people are people who essentially say, poverty is a complicated issue, and I need to take a more systemic view to this. It's not like I'm going to help 5 people and that's going to solve the problem, because the problem is deeper and more nuanced. Hence, can I look at working with the system overall, right? And it's interesting of how people with different anchors to impact actually look at their work in philanthropy. People who have an anchor on self love that immediate sense of gratification, right? They love the fact that they are able to participate in the process, be it volunteering, be it meeting the people, be it actually engaging and having that sense of direct impact. The people who focus on the poor also have a need to see impact as soon as possible, but they want a certain size in which they're able to create that impact, etc. The people who are anchored on the system, they're actually okay to wait for 5 years, 3 years for impact to happen. But what they're asking themselves is this truly creating lasting change? And I think that's extremely critical and important.
Yeah. Thank you, Rathish. That was very consolidated and holistic view of how to anchor your impact and relationship. Moving to the next question, there are signatories of varying net worth who signed up for LivingMyPromise, right? An initiative where individuals pledge to give back more than 50% of their wealth. How can these anchors help these signatories in their choices when it comes to their philanthropic giving?
Absolutely. And I think it goes back to the first question that I asked. I think a need for self-reflection is probably the first step that I would suggest with every person who's signing up for the LivingMyPromise, because they've done the first big step of making the commitment, But if they can step back from there and say, now with this commitment that I've made, and as I'm translating it, what do I want? What do I want for myself? Where is my anchor to impact? I think would be a great question to start with. And I think, as with anything, there is a lot of work that we do from an externality and an external point of view, just to ask the world, what is the problem? But I think if you flip that around and say, ask yourself, what do you really want? And where do you truly lie? And for me, and I've been in this space for a while, and I've seen the increasing judgment or a value, on how some of these anchors are better than the others. And for me personally, I always say, we need more people who are empathetic. We need more people who find it important to make the difference in other people's lives. And it's perfectly okay to be where you're anchored in, as a person. So it's absolutely okay to say, listen, I really love that satisfaction of being able to be a part of it myself. So I think for the signatories, that's really what I would say. To say, step back, ask yourself, what do you truly want for yourself? And from there on, step back and say, okay, if that is what you want, then what is the problem? Because honestly, the benefit of being in India, and I'm saying this on the lighter side, there are a lot of problems. So there's an abundance of problems there. But it'll be great to kind of look at what you really want. Yeah.
Rathish, we have a couple of questions from people who are viewing us today live. Sovik Dhar, the question is whether tracking on impact, we get more data-driven and quantitative factors rather than enhancement of qualitative changes that occur with the community. So how to create more awareness to the philanthropists that change in ground doesn't work like implementing any corporate project? So how do you balance between data and softer aspects of impact?
I think there are two things here, and I want to touch upon that because we often are at the intersection of this tension between the donor and the poor. I think part of what I've seen often is philanthropists start asking for data because they feel, given their backgrounds most of the time, that will give them the confidence that work is happening. You know, and that they feel like, hey, this is going to I will make sure that impact is going on. And there are two fallacies there. One fallacy is if you really don't know what you're looking for, more data doesn't help you get a sense, and you kind of put a lot of overheads. So in some sense, right-sizing the governance that you want to establish, quantitative or qualitative, I think is extremely critical, right? That's number one. The second challenge that we see is, like I said, a funder who's looking at a self as the focus actually does not have 18 months or 12 months to see that impact. They are basically saying, listen, is there something I can do right now where I can be a part of it to create immediate value? And we'll come back to this at a later point in time, having that understanding across both sides, the implementation partner and the funder to say, okay, we are looking for something more immediate, you know, scholarships. Can we find really smart kids, give them scholarships and make sure that they get to a college? The time taken to value is much lesser. So identifying what is the right opportunity for collaboration will actually help reduce this problem because there are problems that will take longer and there are some problems where the value is immediate. And I think that is important to solve.
One more interesting question from Mr. Venkat. Can you give us a sense of real examples of philanthropists who are anchoring, solution on either of the three anchors? It will give a better sense of how models are being implemented.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can't take names, but let me give you examples. One, we recently worked with a family foundation, a high net worth individual based out of the US, had money, wanted to work in education.
Yeah.
They had set up an initiative in Rajasthan where they're working with schools directly in implementing this, and they came to us for scale-up strategy. The team was giving them multiple options. At one point in the meeting, I remember asking this person, you implementing programs in the school is never going to create the highest impact because there's a lot of other good practice that are there. We can bring in other nonprofits to do this, but why are you really doing this? If it's really for the experience of working with the children yourself, I think it's important to be honest about it and say that that's the experience I want. So rather than anchoring, the entire strategy exercise was anchored around how to maximize impact. But the core anchor of this individual was, I want to be part of the change process myself, And it was a hard question for them because they love to believe that it's for the impact, and there's difficulty in accepting the fact that, listen, I want to be a part of the process. But as soon as they accepted it, it became a lot easier for us to say, listen, this is what we should do. And this is how the strategy should be. And that's for me a great example where the anchor to self, where people with money want to be a part of the process, is actually a great model. Again, anchor to the system, I can give you a lot of examples because we are recently kind of looking at it as well. And working with, let's say, people like Amit Chandra, for example, or organizations like MSDF, Omidyar Network, and so on. These organizations, again, over a period of time, have taken the view that, listen, we need to take a longer-term view on the problem that we are solving, because these changes take time, and that kind of goes, then they're okay to then look for indicators and markers to take that this is taking long enough. But if it's systemic change, it's okay if it takes time. And they have a larger interest in looking at what is the infrastructure we need to set up, an ecosystem we need to set up so that things improve, right? Classical example is nonprofit capability building. And the conversation they have always is, what are the structures that will enable a long-term impact on nonprofits as a whole rather than individual nonprofits? Impact on the poor. Currently we're working with the philanthropists who are working in Maharashtra, in a particular region. And they've taken this holistic focus on a particular area. And this particular area is not something that they are in any way part of, They just went around and said, listen, I have a certain sum of capital. I want to go to a part where I can create this most significant difference. They found this location which is not related to them at all. And then now are looking at a model where they're saying, in the next 12 months, can we make sure that there is a change in this community? How can we work here, etc. And that view, in some sense, to say, where is the problem, go there, but make sure that there is a return in the 12 months, I think is a great example. And I hope that answers the question.
Moving forward, thank you for this, Rathish, very insightful. Moving on, is it necessary that there has to be a match when it comes to these anchors between the donor and the organization who's implementing or they're working with, right? Why is this relationship and match important between different stakeholders worldwide?
Absolutely, and I think it just goes back to what we spoke of, right? And I think, I say this: any relationship, if two people are coming with a very different expectation of what they want, you can do whatever you want. In the end, you're just not going to succeed because they just have different expectations from each other. And that is especially true for the donor relationship with a nonprofit, And I often say, think about this as well, that why do business guys often take an external view to say what is the problem? Because the value they want to get out of that business venture is often very clear. It's profit, it's market share, there's standard terms. In impact, I think it's not so. I think people are coming into impact from various different outcomes that they want to achieve. And hence having an honest chat or a conversation or some way of figuring out a vocabulary that is constructive and not judgmental. To say, this is what I'm looking for, can you help? I think is extremely important. And I say this to nonprofits as well, to say, as an organization, if you are clear that my impact is going to be long, so then you have to then know who are the funders you want to go after. And then say, these are the people who have the appetite for a long-term impact, and let's go ahead with it. Some of the other nonprofits have come back and said, listen, I want to have a portfolio, a bouquet of solutions. Some of my problems are immediate. I want to give this to a couple of people. Some of these are more mid-term, some of these are long-term. Some of these are anchored to more experiential sort of funding. And I think when you are smart about it and then you know where to go after, I think it's helpful. Similarly, I think for donors, and this for me is also interesting, that to both your team and to the nonprofit partners you're working with, to say, listen, this year or in this particular program, in this initiative or this part of the money that we're spending, this is what we're looking for, And I think that's extremely important.
Mr. Lakshman, who's one of our viewers, has a similar question around the points you were making, right? Is there an accepted reference of what constitutes impact? Like how does one know that, whether they're making impact or not?
Yeah.
References.
I think, so there are two lines of, ways in which these problems have been solved. I think there is a very engineering way of looking at it to say, let's create the world's largest database of impact indicators, nuance, and so on. And then there is IRIS. There are a lot of other databases that have emerged, right? Which is for the entire ecosystem, let's create a standard template of what impact is looking like. And I think that's useful. And I often find it'll always be lacking, given the problem that we're trying to solve, but it helps standardization. I think vocabulary always helps people. I think that investment should go. The other way to look at what constitutes impact is probably thinking of it as a learning journey. When I say a learning journey, I mean this, right? Today, how do you take a parenting, for example? You have a certain philosophy or belief in terms of what creates a good child. You actually implement that. You see the results, you learn from it, and then you go and make it better. It's a very personal view. You can read as many parenting books as possible, but the relationship is finally personal, and the learning in some sense comes from this entire place of, can I take a learning mindset to this problem and solve it? And I actually feel that with donors, that will be a great way to approach a problem, to say, my definition of impact is this theory of change, which is that if I do these things, lives will get better. You do those things, you see if lives are actually getting better, that is the change that you want to see is actually happening, and then you move forward. And as you would do with parenting or anything else, you just continue to talk to people, reflect on the questions that you are seeing on the ground, understand what everybody else is doing, and then build that understanding for yourself, which is critical. And I think, and I'm not reducing the need for an understanding of the ecosystem. I think you should. But I'm trying to say that people who approach the question of what is impact, approach it from a lens of, can we solve it for the entire world? But I'm saying a personal approach to solving, they're saying, this is my learning, I think is also very valuable.
Rathish, are there any other factors one needs to consider, apart from these anchors that you've kind of shared with us, for organizations or partners or, philanthropists?
Yeah, I think we touched upon some of these points earlier. I think from a philanthropist's point of view, I think 4 factors I feel are often critical. One, like I said before, is to know your anchor of impact. What is that you want to do? I think that's extremely critical. The second is to have a learning mindset. There are for 2 reasons. One, because these problems are complex and systemic. Second, because it's an evolving ecosystem. There are no right answers. So it's perfectly okay to say, what do I want to learn from this? So the way you review, when you go on the field, where you engage with their beneficiaries or you talk to your non-profit partners? Can you continuously have a learning mindset to say, what do I really want to understand about poverty, about the problems I'm trying to solve? Because I think that learning mindset kind of creates that evolution for a philanthropist also. And I've seen this personally, where they go from anchored to self, to anchored to the poor, to anchored to the system, because their learning journey kind of took them through this process, I think that's the second I think prerequisite for success. I think in the absence of that, I don't think true impact really happens. That's the second part. The third part, I think that I've seen as important is, like I said before, right-sizing governance. I think I truly believe that irresponsible philanthropy is a big concern, which is you are giving money and you don't care about it. Because what happens is that money kind of starts to diffuse itself, without you actually applying yourself on it to understand what you really want. But at the same time, overbuilding engineering governance to say, I'm going to make sure that I'll give a timeline and I'll make sure results happen, when that's not what you want, or that's not the kind of problem you're solving, is always worrying. So how do you right-size governance so that this something that's enabling the process, improving it, rather than ensuring that things are not moving? I think that's the third part of the process that I think is extremely critical. And the fourth part of it for me is to ensure that you think beyond capital in terms of what will create impact. And again, I often say this, there's a difference between a customer and an investor in the mainstream ecosystem, right? And customer buys a product and says, listen, as soon as it's done, I have no interest in the person they're delivering it. The investor worries about the organization. Says, listen, what all can I do to make sure you succeed, because your success is mine. I feel like we have too many donors who think like customers in the non-profit space and not as investors. Now, if you can start thinking like investors to say, okay, I've given you money, what else can I give? My network, for example, my credibility, for example, or just time, makes a big difference, right? So this whole investor mindset and not a customer mindset, I think, will go a long way in actually building better relationships.
Cool. Mr. Lakshman, who's viewing our session today, he has one more question. He's asking Sattva's study that we did, right? Everyday giving study. It had certain patterns on non-religious giving. So is there any upward swing expected in the slice of philanthropy? My biggest, and the report kind of talks about one very important thing, and which is something we're seeing in Southeast Asia as well, that religious giving itself can lead to a lot of philanthropy, right? But on the non-religious giving side, I think the biggest swing that I think we should see, and something that Rohini Nilikani highlighted once in a conversation with us, is this idea of giving to people we know to giving to strangers. I think that's the sort of shift that we are expecting in this space to happen, right? We all give to our mates, the people we know of personally, people who ask us, etc. Giving in India is entirely a personal choice. Even at a CSR level, I think it's a very personal choice. How do you move from giving that's personal to getting people to give to strangers, right? And today, a large part of that strategy is by making it convenient. It's just so easy for you to check a box while you're booking a ticket that you're going to give. The second part of it is to create urgency, which is there's a flood, there is some massive crisis, so why don't you give it now, right? The third part of it is looking at increasing credibility. You trust these organizations more, and so you're going to give. So people are working on building credibility, the stock exchange conversation, and so on. I think it's going to be interesting for us as we move forward to see which of these levers actually shifted. And what do we also want from it, right? Do we want more people to give to others, or more to ourselves? I think that's going to be the shift that I think we are watching carefully in terms of convenience, urgency, and credibility. Rathish, we've already established that these anchors are very important to do impact. How can one as a giver reflect and find their own anchor? Somebody who's in the journey of finding their anchor. How can people questions to ask, or what tools one can use to find their own anchor?
That's a great question, right? I'm going to give a philosophical answer, and then I'll probably give a more tangible action item, I think, for myself. I think the philosophical answer is much like entrepreneurship. I think giving eventually is about becoming a better person. And I think becoming a better person starts with your own self-awareness, right? So in some sense, stepping back and saying, really, can I use this framework to ask myself this question, saying, what do I really want? And I think one way to think about it is to really line up choices and say, here are anchored to self choices I make, here are anchored to poor choices I make, anchored to system choices I make. And then asking yourself, where do you gravitate to, I think will be useful. The action item that I'm taking up, this is a good way to end the year, is I think we at Sattva, and personally, I'd love to create a questionnaire that kind of helps people ask themselves this question. Why don't we create something which kind of builds on that article and has 25 questions that people can just answer and say, hey, this means that I'm here. And the one thing that I want to clarify though, while I'm talking about this, is also that we've now seen donors, and especially the more experienced kind, not having that one anchor for themselves as a philanthropist, but knowing what anchor is right for what problem. So they realize that in some cases it's great to have a systemic view. In some cases it's okay to have more immediate sense of focus, because that's probably what it needs. So you might come back and use this questionnaire to kind of realize that this is my anchor as an individual, but also over a period of time realize, hey, you know what, I have multiple anchors. I'd love to do my scholarship program, but I also love to do systemic transmission. And I always remember Jeff Bezos writing that post on Facebook and LinkedIn, right? Saying, I've been highly strategic and systemic about my impact in business. I want to be very immediate in my focus on philanthropy. What should I do? And then a whole bunch of people wrote answers. But for me, it was like a great, even awareness to say, listen, that's what I want to do as one of the richest people in the world, to be saying, I want to create immediate impact on a large number of people. I'm not looking at long-term change. Sending people to Mars, that's good enough. But here, can I be more immediate? Right? Yeah.
So insightful, Rathish. Thank you for sharing that. Rathish, I think you have touched through your conversation on this, but do donors have one anchor, or do they operate from multiple anchors? Like, what is your experience in this field?
Yeah. Again, just as I touched upon right now, I feel like, and this we're seeing in both the CSR case and in the case of individuals, I think the mature donors over a period of time have built that sense of, listen, I need a wider range of anchors for solving problems, because the problems themselves are varied, right? And it's, like in a very mature CSR corporate, you would see there are things that they are willing to take. Like this organization we are working with, right, is willing to give money to an incubator to look at innovations in a particular area around water, because it's going to take a fairly long time to look at innovations, but at the same time have an employee engagement program, which is honestly the design's entirely anchored to self. So I think that in the CSR side, we are seeing a lot of, and even in the individual side, I think we are able to see cases where people are able to step back and say, listen, this problem, if I approach it in a short-term view, I'm not going to have an answer. I'm going to take a long-term view to solving this, like mental health, for example. There's a donor that I'm working with right now, but saying anything that you do in mental health today is not going to be creating a lot of change, because the ecosystem is so nascent. I want to take a long-term view on that. But they want to do something in responsible tourism, because they say that this is going to create a lot of value immediately. So it's interesting to then have the same donor look at problems and say, listen, this needs a long-term view versus this needs a view that's more immediate and short. Any other questions?
Not. We'll just wait for 4 minutes. We have time till 12 o'clock.
Right.
Pick up this thing. Rathish, one question I would personally want to ask you is that we are ending a decade, right? We are 3 days from a new decade starting, new year starting. Yeah. And a lot has happened in the social space in the past 10 years. Right? Now, with the context that people have established their anchors, and now they're looking to spend that money in philanthropic causes. So where do you see the next 10 years, next 5 years, we, as India, where are we heading? Because we have the vibrant CSR space, we have NGOs, philanthropists, government through their aspirational district program, focusing a lot on direct intervention to do social impact. So where do you think the ecosystem is, kind of moving towards?
Yeah, and I think it's a tricky question, right? I feel like, and this is something that when I reflect on the work that we did this year, etc., right? There is that work that has been happening over the last 10 years in what I call the opportunity spectrum. which is let's invest in education so that people can move out of poverty, let's invest in skilling, livelihoods, etc. There is the other spectrum, which is the risk spectrum, right? Which is issues like forced labor, issues like rights, right? Issues of norms and gender, And I think that it's easy to understand the opportunity spectrum for people. Saying, I'm going to give money, people are going to become less poor, or they'll probably pass and escape out of poverty. But I think my big learning is this risk and opportunity spectrums are fairly intertwined, and somehow we, as an impact ecosystem, I think are trying to assume that the risk spectrum is not important to look at. If the opportunity spectrum is big enough, people will move. And I feel like, and in this year, given our work in forced labor, given our work in child rescue rehabilitation, commercial child sexual exploitation, etc., I feel like there's so much to be done in that space. And it's amazing that an organization like Sattva gets to work on it. But I feel like in the next 10 years, if as philanthropists, we can equally look at the opportunity spectrum, the risk spectrum, but also the participation spectrum, which is how do we all participate in the democratic process effectively. I think that's going to be the big question for the next 10 years. Right? I think that's important. Yeah.
We'll take one more questions before, our time is just, running. We're running. So, Mr. Venkat is asking, very specific to Sattva, what services are we offering for philanthropists, and what scale of philanthropy these services kind of are catering to?
Yeah, and for us, it's been an evolution. I think the phase one of Sattva really was about working with non-profits to build their capability. So we essentially said if their ability is improved, then the organization, the impact can be scaled. A big learning was unless you influence where capital is going to flow from, you're never going to be able to shift this needle completely, right? So the second phase of Sattva was with a large number of foundations. We work with some of the biggest ones like Tata Trust, MSDF, and so on. I think that was another learning because they came with a certain view and a level of maturity where they looked at it from a program point of view. The third phase of evolution was with CSRs, and we were lucky to be part of that journey from the start, from 2014. And interestingly, there companies in the beginning, I always use the Google Maps example, right? You first used Google Maps to know where you want to go, and companies called us to say, listen, I need to figure this out. Where can I go, and so on. And increasingly now, just like you use Google Maps not to know how to go, but what is the fastest way to get there? So companies are now coming to us and saying, what is the more effective way of doing philanthropy? So with corporates and, we've now built an entire advisory range to say, how can I help you figure out what you can do? A similar conversation around anchors that companies can use, which is more specialized for companies today, and so on. And also then helping them manage their money first. So not only telling you what you should invest in, but also then identifying the nonprofit, doing the due diligence, managing your money, assessing the impact. I think that range of services that Sattva is providing, I think, has matured over the last 5 years. And since last year, I think what's interesting for us is our conversations with HNIs and ultra HNIs. Working with a lot more family offices, very nascent family foundations, and individuals themselves who have reached a point in their life where they're like, okay, now I need to engage myself very actively in philanthropy. What can we do? And it's been interesting where some philanthropists see us as advisors to say, can you help me understand the space? I had a few conversations on yesterday about with philanthropists on this, and some of them see us as custodians of their wealth. In some sense, saying, can you help me make sure that my social return on investment from this is as high as possible? Where we are actively involved in implementing it on the ground and finding the right partners with the expertise, etc. So I think from a pure services point of view, that's the range that we're working with. And I think the ability to advise people on where they can put money, to manage their investments for them, and 3, in cases where we are not managing, assessing the impact that they're able to have, I think are probably the 3 most relevant services we are able to offer. Yeah, I think the one thing that I would add to the conversation, I think we are out of time and we will have to close, really is also to, for reflecting on my own personal journey, etc., not to see these anchors as being deterministic for the rest of our lives, both with my own experience in the space and motivations for starting Sattva, and also what I see with philanthropists, both institutional and individual, is that there is a certain journey that you go through, irrespective of where you start, And it's always not that you start from self and go to system. I think it seems like a linear progression. There are people who started the system and realized the value to have their own personal gratification from impact as well. So it's a great, it's worthwhile to not ask yourself this one question at the beginning of your philanthropy journey, but kind of think about it on a regular basis. Say, has that evolved? Am I looking at some problems differently, etc., which I think might be useful and helpful. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rathish. I hope all the people who've listened to us live enjoyed the conversation. And Rathish is reachable, over email. Rathish@sattva.co.in for any questions on Anchor and hierarchy of impact. Thank you so much for joining. And yes, before you sign off, please do not forget to like Living My Promise page and stay tuned for more FB live sessions every Saturday. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.